Mecca is missing. Torpedo 3. 7th century written sources. What do Muslim sources claim about the holy city? The Standard Islamic Narrative or SIN claims that A. Mecca was the mother of all cities, that's in Quran 692, and that dates back to the time of Adam and Eve. And B. It was a center of influence that could raise large armies of up to 3,000 men and 2,500 camels. But the evidence shows that although there are frequent references to, quote, the city, unquote, in the Quran, Mecca is directly named only once. That's in chapter 48, verse 24. So how is it that the mother of all cities and the most holy place in Islam is named only once in the sacred scripture of Islam? Firstly, we need to look at what did people of the 7th century mean by Arabia. For the 7th century people, the term Arabia did not mean the whole of what we call Saudi Arabia. There were actually 3 Arabias. There was Arabia Petraea, Arabia Deserta, and Arabia Felix. Arabia Petraea was the rocky Arabia that was in southern Jordan and had well-known cities and towns, and it had water. Arabia Felix was the, quote, happy Arabia, unquote, that was in the south, such as Yemen. It was happy because it also had water. And Arabia Deserta was the desert Arabia, so called because it had no water. Mecca was in this area. So when ancient non-Muslim writers mention people of Arabia, it's unlikely they are talking about Arabia Deserta. It's more likely that they're referring to Arabia Petraea or Arabia Felix, because these areas had water and therefore would have had people. Next, let's look at when do we actually find Mecca on maps? Because if Mecca was the mother of all cities, as per Quran 692, and was around from the time of Adam and Eve, then it should be on maps from the earliest times. We can make maps of what the Middle East looked like in the 2nd century AD, based on 2nd century sources such as Ptolemy. Mecca is not found on any 2nd century maps. We can do the same with 7th century AD sources, but Mecca is not found on any 7th century map either. The earliest maps that show Mecca are from the 9th century AD. Why? Because Mecca did not exist in the 2nd century AD or the 7th century AD. It existed in the 9th century AD. And this is exactly what the coins tell us. Torpedo 3 scores a direct hit. Now, the first mention of Mecca outside the Standard Islamic Narrative is the Continuato Byzantica Arabica. It says, quote, Mecca, Abraham's house, lies between in Chaldea and Haras. Haras is actually Haran. This is dated to AD 741. That's the 8th century. But look at where these areas are. Both of them are in Mesopotamia. And and Haran are more than 1,000 kilometers away from today's Mecca. Therefore, it's highly unlikely that this Mecca, quote unquote, refers to the Mecca of Saudi Arabia. When we put this with the inscription near Taif, it suggests that there was a 2nd sanctuary by the end of the 7th century AD. And over time, this became the main sanctuary. So we have Mecca 1 and Mecca 2. Please note that this is purely a hypothesis, but it does explain the evidence. And if Mecca was the mother of all cities and around since Adam and Eve, then surely someone would have mentioned it before 741. But there is no mention of Mecca by any of the surrounding empires. This includes the Assyrians, the Nabateans, the Kedarites, the Nubians, Babylonians, Persians, Kindarites, Sabaeans, and Himyarites. None of these kingdoms mention Mecca, so it's highly unlikely that the SIN claims about Mecca are factual. Torpedo 3 scores a direct hit. Now, ancient sources do mention cities in North Arabia and Jordan, such as Medina, Taif, and Khaybar, and they also mention places in South Arabia, such as Najran, and kingdoms in Yemen, such as Sheba and Hadramaut. This includes Assyrian texts from the 7th century BC, Babylonian chronicles of Nabonidus from the 6th century BC, which mention Medina, the Greek historians Herodotus, 5th century BC, and Diodorus, 4th century BC, the Jewish historian Josephus, and the Greek geographer Strabo, 1st century BC, and finally Ptolemy, the 2nd century AD Roman geographer. So even though historians knew about Arabia, no one mentions Mecca before AD 741. So why does no one mention Mecca before the 8th century? Because Mecca did not exist before the 8th century. Torpedo 3 scores a direct hit. Now, some Muslims claim that there are indirect references to Mecca in ancient sources. They claim that Pliny the Elder's Dabanagoras Regio is actually a mistranslation of Dubanu Quraysh, i.e. the tribe of Muhammad. Now, not only is this linguistically incorrect, but the area he mentions can be shown on a map. As we can see, Dabanagoras is area 149 on the map. This is on the Persian Gulf side of Arabia, but Mecca is on the Red Sea side, separated by more than 1,000 kilometers of punishing desert. Some claim that Pliny's Portus Morcabi is actually a reference to Mecca, but this is Area 150 on the map. It's also on the Persian Gulf side and more than 1,000 kilometers away from Mecca. And finally, some claim that Ptolemy's Makaraba is actually a reference to Mecca. But in Arabic, Makaraba is MKR, which is not linguistically equivalent to Mecca, which is MKH. So Torpedo 3 still scores a direct hit.